Hey guys, welcome back to another Architecture Real Talk. A lot of you guys really enjoyed my 1920s to 1980s analysis of homes in the past. And I stopped at 1980s because I was examining just old houses, what we define as old today. Now, a lot of you guys asked me, can you take that further? It goes into 1990s, 2000, pretty much the last 3 decades that we had. So, how would we go about examining it? And one of the things I want you to take into account is that a cultural phenomenon that a lot of our architecture nowadays is reflected in what we value. So it is important for me to talk about those times in this manner. So let's go ahead and pick up right where we left off with the 1980s. So the 1980s was the rise of production homes. This is where homes were still practical in size. A lot of your housing, especially when it comes to kitchen spaces, living spaces, were still relatively large, but you don't see large closets. You don't see higher than 8-foot ceilings because it was still designed around efficiency, and manufactured homes prized themselves on quick deliverable times. And at the same time, with a lack of technological boom, you still had homes that were dedicated in a manner where people still played outside, kids went outside, camping was still a thing back then, and this is where we transition into the 1990s. Now, the 1990s, as you know, as a culture, prized over the Mcmansion era, where whether you're looking at MTV Cribs for celebrities showing off their houses, if you're looking at Full House, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Home Alone, all of these various shows were centered around a large house. And a lot of Americans gravitated towards that. Even to this day, if you were to do a quick search on hard.com on houses that were beyond 2,000 square feet as single stories or 2,500 square feet as single story dwelling, you will find a lot of those were built in the 1990s, early 1990s. This is also where we see the dot-com boom. And the dot-com boom allowed people to get rich very quickly, almost overnight, much like what we're seeing as a trend in crypto is what took place in the dot-com movement. And all of the early 1990s, you see a lot of proliferation of houses, but these are very large houses in general. Now, the style of architecture became relative. People gravitated toward Mediterranean style. Some people had their own arts and crafts, but these were all just for aesthetic purposes only. These movements were not factored behind a theory. Now, right at the emergence of 2000s, what we find is the country entered a war era. We entered into war on terrorism. We had a 9/11 scare, and the country tries to retract, but at the same time, the housing continued to boom all the way up to the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008. And in the 2000s, what you see is much of what you see in the late 1990s or early 1990s. The houses start to become a little bit more smaller, but they're prized in efficiency. You see a lot more two-story dwelling, but you also see a rise in home automation. You start seeing Ethernet as part of a normal thing being offered in the home. Security being offered as a normal thing in the home. A lot of the home came equipped with glass break sensors. We start seeing a lot of the security features being integrated into the walls. There was also a rise in high-end finishes. We see a lot of people gravitating towards granite or different types of finishes for your interiors. The interiors still remain relatively dark, coming in from 1980s. As the construction continued to boom, a lot of people were given loans and bought into mortgages more than they could afford. And what that led to in the late 2000s, or 2008 in particular to 2010, is there was a market crash. A lot of people were beyond spent, or they were way high up there when it comes to their debt to income ratio. So a lot of the mortgages collapsed. And as it internally collapsed, so did the prices for the homes. And you see this early in the 2010s and 2012 as the market tries to recover. A lot of the homes were not built back right around that era. If you were to quickly examine your city between the year of 2008 and 2010, up until 2012, you don't see a rise of home production. And then 2012, it starts taking off. And what you see is now an introduction of light colors. From 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s to now, houses have become more and more open floor plan. You see an archetype of grand room being developed. You also see an isolated room, such as a formal living room, formal dining room, or something that is for guests only. Privacy in the primary bedroom becomes more important, and you see the separation between the primary bedroom happens around 2010 or early into 2000s, that you see the separation between the primary bedroom and the secondary bedroom. Smart home technology became more sophisticated with features such as voice control assistance, smart thermostat, automatic lighting, and security system. Amenities shifted towards communal spaces such as rooftop gardens, co-working spaces. So overall, you have more hybridization and multifamily development come about late 2010s. This is when you have a multi-generational living and accessory dwelling coming about. A lot of the popularity came from the fact that the homes became widely unavailable or they were unaffordable by the generation to come. The income to debt ratio, or the amount of salary that we make today versus how much the house costs, has drastically have started to skew in different direction. People earn far less money to afford housing. And a lot of the people that's supposed to move out at 18, 21, nowadays the average age has become 28 or 26. And even those who move out early on in their life find themselves going back to their parents' house. And because of this multi-generational people living inside the dwelling, we have such thing as rise in next-gen housing. You have the rise of people dwelling in the basement. You have the separation divide between the second floor and the first floor being occupied by two different generations. And this starts happening more in 2010 as opposed to any other time. You also see a rise of Google integrated homes, you see Wi-Fi integrated homes, and this starts becoming a phenomenon. The codes catch up and start affecting residential communities as well. So what you see is people having fire code or even sprinkler system attached into their home. A lot of the homes now are able to take in solar and have dedicated circuit for a solar panel to be installed on the roof. And this happens around 2010. Now, much of what happens in 2020 or the COVID-19 era, as I would say, up until 2019, 2018, a lot of the houses were continuing to be built. And around 2019, when COVID-19 hit, a lot of the houses either stopped production or the city themselves stopped inspecting houses. You see a rise in the health and wellness features such as air purification systems and home gyms gain more popularity in the 2020s. And you see suburban and rural areas experience a resurgence in popularity as people sought out more space and privacy away from urban centers. And people start moving out from the cities as remote working becomes more readily available. So you see a drop in overall production of the home, or the quality of the home drastically drops around 2019. We have houses nowadays that are built in 2020 that have structural issues, that have foundation issues, that have electrical issues, because they lack that fortitude of a house. With that said, that concludes all of 1980s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. I would love to do another series in 10, 15 years from now, looking back at this era and what we contributed to housing. Follow for more content.